The Lifestyle Show, presented by Selina Mackenzie.
Now, in her memoir, Laura Delano takes readers through the labyrinth of the American mental health system, where the best available care left her sicker, more desperate, and more lost than ever before. She joins us to tell us her story. Great to have you on the show with us, Laura.
Oh, it's so nice to be here, Selina. Thanks for having me.
So, wow, that sounds awful. Your journey started at just age 14, I believe.
Yes, I was sent to my first therapist at 13 and my first psychiatrist at 14.
And why was that? Were your parents worried about you? Were you worried about you? What was happening?
At that time, I was in grade 8, and on paper, I had everything together. I was a good student with good grades. I was a competitive athlete. I was a leader of my middle school student government. But underneath, I was totally lost, and I'd had this scary experience in front of a bathroom mirror one night when I was brushing my teeth, when I realized I didn't know who I was. I was just performing all of these roles. Did I have a real self? Was there anything I actually cared about? So I'd had this breakdown internally that I was trying to keep hidden. I didn't tell anyone about it, but I eventually couldn't kind of keep everything contained within me. And I began acting out and yelling and screaming and pushing my family members. I began cutting myself. I was thinking about death. I was just totally terrifying my poor parents who didn't know what to do with me. And so they, not seeing any other options, sent me to a mental health professional, thinking that was the right thing to do. And it really was the only option they saw. And I was against it. I didn't like being sent to a therapist, but I was a kid, so I didn't have a choice.
Yeah, I understand that. And you say your poor parents, and I'm sure it was hard for them, but poor you, because to go through that at any age must be scary and daunting and frightening, but particularly if you're just 13 or 14 and probably struggling with puberty at the same time.
Exactly. And in retrospect, I think what I was going through was quite a universal experience, maybe a bit more on the intense end of the spectrum. But part of the challenge was that at the time, and this was the mid-1990s, I didn't see any other girls in my all-girls school talking about these challenges. I don't think my parents saw any other parents talking about their own challenges. So it felt like this very private, unique situation we were in that no one else was going through. And of course, in retrospect, I see this is an archetypal adolescent experience.
Yeah, quite possibly. You just had it on a larger scale, just quite a severe case. Yeah. So when they took you to see a psychiatrist, what did they say then? Were they able to try and diagnose you?
In the first session I had with the psychiatrist, I was told that my anger outbursts and my irritability and my rage were symptoms of mania. And I was told that my self-injury and my despair and my, the thoughts of death, all of that were symptoms of depression, and that I had an incurable illness called bipolar disorder, literally in the first appointment with the psychiatrist. And what I didn't know at the time, of course, because I was a kid, and what my parents didn't know, was that the mid-1990s in the United States was the time when this idea of kids who were having anger outbursts and despair, were getting labeled with this juvenile bipolar disorder diagnosis, which had previously been something that psychiatrists didn't think was possible. And so the timing was rather perfect for me to have this breakdown, because it fit the criteria for this diagnosis.
Yeah, it was the buzzword of the time.
Right. Yep.
It's interesting you mentioned the word mania, because they used to call bipolar disorder manic depression, didn't they, back in the day?
They did, yes. And I don't exactly know when that term was replaced with the bipolar disorder term, but it that by the time I was given the diagnosis, bipolar was what it was called.
And what did they do then? What was their answer to try and cure you?
I was put immediately on 2 prescribed drugs. I was put on Prozac and of course, an antidepressant, and a mood stabilizer called Depakote, which is actually an anti-epileptic drug. And neither of these drugs at the time had been approved for the use in children, for psychiatric use in children. But I didn't know that, and my parents didn't know that.
Yeah, that's the trouble. I suppose you definitely didn't because you were a child, but why would your parents know? Nobody probably been through anything like this in your family. So you do have to trust the authorities, the doctors, the psychiatrists, the men in white coats to do the right thing for your child, don't you?
Indeed. And especially back then when, the internet wasn't even really a thing. Where, if they had wanted to educate themselves, where would they really even have looked? I mean, I in retrospect, I think, of course, they didn't have any more information than what the doctor told them.
Yeah, of course. It seems quite severe to put you on mood stablers and antidepressants, particularly Prozac, as a child. But you said this was the start of a very painful and relentless journey for the next 13 years. So what happened then?
Well, for the rest of high school, I tried to reject what the psychiatrist told me. I whenever I could, I avoided taking the medications. I refused to accept that I was bipolar. I knew then that my emotions were actually meaningful responses to the environment that I was in and the pressures that I felt and in my school and the expectations I felt just from the culture I was in. But as the years passed and I tried my best to reject this idea that my brain was broken, basically, I continued to feel lost and life continued to not make sense to me, and I didn't feel like I fit in anywhere. And so by the time I got to college and I got into Harvard University, I was still kind of playing this performance game. I was just in so much emotional pain and really struggling to take care of myself and to function that I concluded that psychiatrist, years earlier must have been right. What's wrong? I think this must be wrong. What's wrong with me? Because I have everything, I've achieved all of these things that I'm meant to achieve, and yet I want to die. And so at that point, at age 18, for the next decade, I was a very diligent patient. I accepted what I was told by my doctors. I took the meds they put me on. And as time passed, 2 meds became 3, became 4, became 5. And my life just continued to steadily get more dysfunctional. My physical health deteriorated. I had all these chronic pain, chronic migraines. My weight fluctuated, skin issues, hair falling out, all of these issues. And mentally and emotionally, I just continued to spin out. And what we were told each step of the way was that my illness was progressing. And eventually in my mid-20s, I was such a mess, and I was, completely dependent on my family. I couldn't work. I had no friends. I was just totally dysfunctional. I was told that my illness was now treatment resistant, meaning I was just so sick that even the treatment couldn't help me. And that story was so horrible to hear, because I had invested so many years in being a good patient and getting my treatment and hoping that one day the treatment would help. And now I was being told I was just too sick for even the treatment. And that story led me to try to kill myself eventually, because I concluded I couldn't go on this way. This wasn't a life worth living. Life kind of continued on like that for another couple of years until my late 20s, when I had what you could call a kind of awakening to all of this.
So just going back, when they told you treatment resistant, did you just stop all the medication then?
That's a great question. No. And that was I think what led me to eventually try to kill myself, because no one said, oh, so let's get you off all of these meds that aren't helping you. It was just, well, let's just keep going. Maybe some new meds will become available. You just got to hold your head up, hold your chin up, don't give up, keep going. So no one ever at any step of the way, including myself, stepped back and said, should I maybe try not taking these meds? It never once really occurred to me that might be something worth trying.
Yeah. And then you've got to be careful, haven't you? One, that you didn't become addicted to them really after 13 years, but also that you can't just stop some of this medication. You have to wean yourself off it.
Exactly. And this is what I ended up discovering the hard way a few years after my overdose, when I tried to kill myself, when I actually did wake up from all of this and I actually did step back and start asking questions about the meds. And that what led me to that point was that I had a few encounters. So this was 2010. I was 27 years old. My job was basically going to psychiatric treatment. I would go to the psychiatric hospital each day and sit in groups all day. And I ended up having a few encounters with the psychiatric force, basically with psychiatrists who decided to put me in a hospital when I didn't want to go in to the hospital. They made me take a medication I didn't want to take. These kinds of experiences that got me questioning, these doctors I had turned to for care over all these years. They also had the power to strip me of my basic rights. And so I started to question other things too, including the meds. And I began to realize I've been on these drugs since I was a kid. I have no idea what my baseline state would be off of them. What would my personality be like? How manageable would my struggles be if I wasn't on them? I began asking all these questions. And then I ended up in that questioning state, finding a book by an American science journalist named Robert Whitaker called Anatomy of an Epidemic. And the book makes a very compelling case that if you actually look at the long-term outcomes of psychiatric drug use in America, they're quite poor. And it's quite likely possible that on the whole, psychiatric treatment is making us more disabled. And that was my aha moment. I was on 5 medications, and the previous decade, my life had fallen completely apart. And it all clicked, and I said, oh my gosh, what if it's not treatment-resistant mental illness? What if it's treatment? And it was at that point that I decided to come off the meds. And as you said, Selina, I did not know at the time that my brain was physically dependent on these medications because of how long I'd been on them for. And I didn't know that you have to taper off them slowly. And so I came off of them in about half a year, which is basically cold turkey. And it was an unspeakably challenging experience. And I think what happens to a lot of people when they try to come off of their medications for whatever reason is they stop them too fast, not realizing it. They feel horrible, and then they're told, oh, see, you're having a relapse of your illness. This is why you need to be on meds. And people get stuck in this loop. And thank goodness I ended up finding out eventually that this is what was happening for me, that I was actually in withdrawal, because I think a lot of people don't. And then they end up staying on the meds indefinitely because they feel horrible every time they try to stop them.
Yeah. Did you fight it then, even though you knew that it was withdrawal? It still must have been pretty awful. Were you determined to come off them?
I was. I knew that I had to find out who I would be off of these meds that I've been on for so many years. And so in reality, for a time, I said to myself, if I give this a shot and I end up feeling horrible, I can always kill myself. I mean, that was the state of mind that I was in, but I knew I had to give myself a chance. And it was really hard. The first year was especially challenging. Taking a shower was a huge accomplishment. I lived with my aunt and uncle. I was totally dependent on my family to take care of me. I was still going to the psychiatric hospital every day, but I just kept going. And I would say, between, the first year and the third year of coming off and being off, that was when my body and my cognitive functioning and my emotional state really began to reintegrate. And I had also, during this time, began writing about what I was going through, because I realized, I've been defining myself and telling myself a story about who I am that has been so medicalized over all of these years, by which I mean, anytime I felt a painful emotion, I thought of it as a symptom of my so-called illness, and I needed to treat it. That had been my story of self. And if this wasn't actually the case, if these drugs had been harming me, and if maybe there was a life for me beyond a psychiatric diagnosis, I had to figure out what had actually happened to me. So I began writing a blog, and that just gave me this sense of purpose and the sense of value that I could offer something to other people and take what I'd been through and use it to help someone else. And so I think because I had such a strong sense of meaning and purpose, those years of withdrawal that were so hard felt bearable because I was connected to this, and I knew I had to keep going and kind of trust in my own process and trust in all the possibility that lay ahead of me.
That's amazing. And how are you now? Are you okay now?
Well, it's funny, sometimes I find myself saying, well, if I went to a psychiatrist, you would probably give me a couple of diagnoses, definitely anxiety disorder or whatever, But the thing is, the whole diagnostic paradigm just is meaningless to me today in part because I've educated myself about the history of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM, our psychiatric Bible. You all have the ICD over there. And I've learned that it's actually a very subjective process. These are not like scientifically validated, objective diseases. They're subjective descriptors. So for me, I'm like, you know what? I could probably get a few diagnoses, but I don't really care because they don't feel useful to me anymore. And so I still feel intense emotions. I'm still prone to be distrustful of my situation. I'm quick to anger. I'm quick to grief. I'm quick to anxiety. But I know now that these are not symptoms of an illness. These are signals from my body about my life. And, usually I end up, if I pause and kind of pay attention to what my life looks like, I'm like, okay, I've been in front of my computer for 6 hours without going outside. Or, I'm eating a lot of processed sugar, and that is probably playing a part. Or I'm overly stressed, or I'm not getting enough sleep, or I'm not, I usually can figure out, okay, there are things that are happening in my life that are at the root of why I'm feeling the way that I feel. And then sometimes the pain isn't something that I can take action around. It's just grief about the state of our world and how much pain people are in and all of that. And I'm like, I just have to feel this pain. I don't need to do anything about it, and I don't need to be afraid of it. I think that's a big shift for me today.
Yeah. We don't need to label these things, do we? I mean, the normal man on the street or woman on the street can have anxiety. We just learn to live with it in this day and age.
Yeah, and I think sometimes the emotional difficulty is a message that you need to do something. And of course, sometimes people really do need support and connection and resources. So there are things to do sometimes, but I think you're right that we live in a time when, we get messages bombarding us all day that if you feel discomfort, you need to do something to change it. Something's wrong with you. You should improve yourself or get some relief. And I think that quest for the quick fix for relief can end up ironically leading us to more pain and suffering. At least that's what happened for me. And so now I'm like, I'm human, and it's hard to be alive sometimes.
Yes, of course.
I don't need to be afraid of it.
Yeah, quite right. Well, I'm sure this book is really going to help a lot of people. It's called Unshrunk, How the Mental Health Industry Took Over My Life and My Fight to Get It Back, by Laura Delano, who we're speaking to now. And I know there's a lot of help also on your website, Laura. Do you want to give your website address out?
Yes, please. Thanks for that. So the nonprofit that I founded a few years ago is called Inner Compass Initiative, and you can find us at theinnercompass.org. And our mission is to help people make more informed choices about diagnoses, medications, and safer medication tapering. We provide information, and we also connect people to each other to support one another in our online community. So if you want to learn more about any of these issues, you can find us there. We offer everything for free. We have scholarships for our community, for anyone who needs them. We are not anti-medication. We believe in the right that we all have to make informed choices. And then you can find me at my website, lauradelano.com, and I'd love to hear from you there.
Wonderful. Well, I thank you for your time today, Laura. Thank you for being on the show. You take care.
Oh, Selina, thank you for having me. It was great chatting. Take care.
It was great chatting. Bye-bye.